Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hello, lovely listeners! How are you doing today? Have you had a good week since the last episode? I've been pretty busy, but managed a fair chunk of sewing, which has been bringing me a lot of joy. So after the Ponte joggers for my daughter fail that I mentioned last week, I cut out another pair for her from some leftover Atelier Brunette sweatshirt fleece, and that's been in my stash for years. And they've come out really nicely, so I'm super pleased with them, although I am a little bit jealous because the fabric is so nice. But anyway, that's a win. I've also finally cut out and started a dress that I've had planned for yonks. So I'm going to a wedding in a couple of weeks, and I've realised that I don't really have anything suitable to wear, even though it's not like a super fancy wedding. But I think that this dress will work for it, so I'm using the deadline of the wedding to make me push ahead and get it done. So does anyone else do this, where you stall your sewing plans for so long that it can be hard to find the motivation for doing it? Although I'm not usually a fan of wearing dresses at all, I think this one's going to be really nice, and I'm starting to get excited about having it in my wardrobe. I'm using some viscose that has a kind of abstract print that I bought about a year and a half ago during lockdown. Plus I'm using the Pléiade de dress pattern by French Poetry. I'm making the view with a pussy bow if you're interested. I've already made one completely avoidable mistake, which was entirely caused by the fact that I prepped the pattern months ago and then I forgot what I'd done and then I forgot to check the instructions. But I think I've rectified the situation fairly well. So I'm not sure that I have anything to discuss in terms of eco-related sustainability this week. So I'm going to tell you about something else that I got up to related to a different kind of sustainability. So I've got this amazing friend called Harriet, and she's an art therapist living in Spain. She's also a super creative person, and she tries her hand at loads of different creative outlets. And one of her long-standing loves is collage. Anyway, at the weekend, she hosted a dream board making workshop for some of her friends via Zoom. So the day before, she sent us some questions to mull over in advance of the session. And the one that I focused on was, what do you wish to grow in your life? And then in the actual session the following evening, a bunch of us who are all friends of Harriet's in different places around the world met on Zoom. We started by telling each other how we responded to the questions, and then we set to work cutting stuff out of magazines and sticking them down. By the end of it, we all had these amazing and very different dream boards, which kind of expressed our responses to those questions that she set us, and then we presented them to each other. We were then told to position our dream board somewhere where we'd see it every day. Honestly, it was a really fantastic experience and way more powerful than I was expecting. It's helped me clarify lots of issues in my life and approaches to things that have been leaving me feeling pretty frustrated. So I'm not going to bore you with all my realizations, but honestly, during the week since making it, I felt so good. I feel like I've got my priorities more aligned. So I guess that to me is a form of sustainability in the personal sense, by re-establishing my priorities and setting some boundaries. My work activity and my home life are going to function in a much more healthy way. Whew, intense, eh? Who knew so much could come from cutting and sticking? So this week, I'm very grateful to have 3 lovely new patrons of the podcast. Thanks Lisa, Gillian and Emily for signing up to support Check Your Thread via Patreon. If you've been enjoying what you've heard so far and want to help keep those episodes coming, please consider supporting the podcast via Patreon. So you can find the link in the show notes on the website checkyourthread.com or go to patreon.com/checkyourthread. Right, let's turn our attentions to today's episode. As you've probably figured out by now, I've always got my eyes peeled for interesting and useful ways to use up fabric scraps. Well, a couple of months ago, I got an email from a publisher asking if I'd be interested in talking to the author of a new book on rag rugging. So, of course, the answer was yes. So today, I've got for you a conversation with author and rag rug expert Elspeth Jackson, which coincides with the release of her new book, Rag Rug Techniques for Beginners, which is out this week. Elspeth has carved out a career for herself based on teaching and writing about rag rugging, as well as selling kits through her business, Ragged Life. We chatted about the history of rag rugs, their shifting role in society, and how Elspeth came to adopt the rag rug tradition as a form of creativity. She also told me about the simplest way to get involved and most significantly, perhaps for our purposes, how it can help us make the most of even the smallest fabric scraps. Okay, let's get on with it then. Hi Elspeth, how are you doing today?
Hi Zoe, yes, I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. So is it true that you are making me jealous because you're currently in Spain?
It is a little bit true, yeah. I think that I've got a lot of jealous people back in the UK going, oh, why?
Yeah. What's a holiday? Tell me about that. Well, I hope you're having a lovely time.
Thank you, I am.
So would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a bit about you?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Elspeth Jackson, and my business is Ragged Life. So everything that I do is to do with modern rag rugging. And clues kind of in the name, but for anyone who's new to the craft, rag rugging is the process of making rugs out of old rags. So old clothing, textile waste, offcuts, any little bits and bobs you can find around the house, you can probably put in a rag rug.
Brilliant. I have so many questions, but I want to hear about you first.
Okay. I've been doing rag rugging for about, 16 years now as a hobby. And then as a full-time job, I've been doing it for about 6 or 7 years. And Ragged Life, I kind of run workshops across the UK. I sell kits so that people can make rugs out of their old treasured clothing bits, memory mats, maybe from old children's clothing. And I just have a riot. I love experimenting with different fabrics. So probably a woman after your own heart, Zoe, because I know you're quite the fan of some textiles.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Just when you were saying all the scraps of fabric that you have laying around. I mean, most of the people that listen to this podcast are sewers. I would say most of those are garment makers. So scraps of fabric is not something that we're not familiar with. So was there a specific point or project where something clicked for you and you really kind of developed a passion for it?
Yeah, I mean, my origin story, as you could say, is a little bit of a weird one because most people, when they come across rag rugging, they start with a rug because that's what the heritage of rag rugging is. But actually, the way in which I got into rag rugging is that my school used to do a recycled fashion show every year. And anyone who was studying art had to make a costume out of recycled materials. So you can imagine the absolutely horrific things that we were wearing, or bottle tops and everything else. But my mum had always made rag rugs. We had them all about the house. And I thought to myself, that would make a really, really cool outfit. So, Mum, do you mind teaching me how to rag rug? And I'll make myself an outfit out of this kind of craft. And the costume that I made took me forever to make. It was like, just kept going and going and going because it was the equivalent of wearing like a gigantic rug skirt and then this kind of weird waistcoat thing on top. And it was really impractical because it was really itchy, really heavy. I didn't line it, of course, because, try telling a 14-year-old to line something.
Yeah. You're like, what? Make another garment? No, I've just done one.
I was exactly like that. I was like, an hour of pain for, 6 hours of making this inner lining. It's just like, no, the hour of pain is enough. The school gave me second prize because I think they felt so sorry for me for having spent such a long time. But I was really, really addicted to the process because anyone who tries rag rugging will find out very quickly that it's not a difficult craft, which is one of the things I love. It's very repetitive, very mindful, and it's just a very kind of accessible, easy craft, really.
Yeah. So your mum made rag rugs.
Yeah, she still does. My mum is the OG, you could say. She's the original rag rug guru. And she still makes absolutely stunning rag rugs.
Amazing. So how did she learn?
So she's actually kind of self-taught because it's not like a lot of crafts. There's not an awful lot out there. Like she basically, I think she found a rag rug in a charity shop. She was able to kind of work out from looking at how it was kind of constructed, how it was done. Yeah.
Yeah.
She just taught herself.
Wow, what a legend. That's so cool. My mum came to visit me a couple of weekends ago and she saw your book that I had and we were having a talk about it. And so she grew up, her childhood was spent in London in the 1950s. And she said that
rag rugs were really common, especially in working class homes during that time. So I was thinking that I guess, advances in like carpet making and stuff, the technology of that kind of improved, and buying carpets and rugs became cheaper. And so subsequently the kind of popularity of them has kind of gone on the wane a bit. So can you tell us anything about like the history of rag rugging in the UK specifically?
Yeah, so basically traditionally here in the UK, we make rag rugs out of a Hessian backing. So it tends to be like old potato sack and any old rag. So it's a very basic way of doing it. It mainly cropped up in the mining areas in Victorian times. And it was very much that kind of making use out of what you've got, making sure that no little thing went to waste. People used to kind of use the old jackets, trousers. They'd probably save cottons for patchworking and things, but anything else would go in the rag rug. You could only start making rag rugs after textile manufacturing kind of took off, because then fabric was more widely available. Like it still wasn't cheap as it is today, but you had a lot more of it than when, things weren't made by machine, they were made by hand. And in terms of like the history of rag rugging, there actually was a point where rag rugs got a certain amount of stigma associated with them because they had their kind of origins in poverty. So there was this kind of complete backlash in the kind of like early 20th century where it was, you've only got a rag rug because you can't afford fitted carpet or a rug.
That's kind of like a bit of the stigma that kind of went along with like home sewn garments for a certain generation, I guess, as well.
It's exactly that similar thing of like, ooh, you've got a rag rug, it's obviously because you're a bit down on your luck. And still to this day, sometimes I'll go to some of the big fairs and, you'll come across people who are maybe slightly older who are like, oh, why are you making them?
That's so interesting.
Yeah, trying to avoid them. And I'm like, well, I enjoy making them. Yeah, it's funny.
But you were saying on your website, Ragged Life, that you've seen a rise in interest in rag rugging more recently.
Yeah, it's become much more popular. I think a lot of people are thinking to themselves, I want to be a bit more sustainable. I want to be using up stuff that I've already got as opposed to going out and buying lots of new things. I think also there's that kind of detoxing from technology.
Yes, I was totally thinking that. Yeah. As you were saying about the meditative mindfulness element, I guess there's a lot of people, isn't there, whose jobs are on a laptop, on a computer all day and are looking for other kind of things to do to help them wind down and disconnect from screens.
Yeah, and rag rugging is quite unique within the craft world in that you need very few tools. It's very accessible, and it's the kind of thing where you don't need to go and set yourself up on a table with a sewing machine, which can be sometimes you're having to go to another room, you're not in the social space. It's a different kind of craft. In rag rugging, you can do it on your lap in front of the TV. And, once you've got a bit of an eye in, you don't need to necessarily even look at it very much. I wouldn't recommend watching TV programs with subtitles, perhaps. But anything else, like I'll just sit in front of the TV and just happily rag rug away with my boyfriend and my cat next to me.
Oh, that sounds pretty idyllic. So you've now written 2 books about rag rugging. Your second book is called Rag Rug Techniques for Beginners, which will be available to buy the week that this episode goes out. So congratulations.
Thank you, Zoe. Yeah, it feels amazing. I can't believe it's finally being published.
So I was sent a copy by your publisher, so I've had a chance to have a good look. How does this one differ from your previous book, and what's in this new one?
So my first book, which was Rag Rugs, Pillows and More, focused on the 2 main traditional British techniques of rag rugging. So those are traditional, done into Hessian, the ones that I've kind of been mentioning thus far. But the more I kind of went down the rabbit hole of rag rugging, the more I realized that in different countries across the world, people make rag rugs in very different ways. And I was kind of interested in learning some of these other techniques, so that you can kind of like preserve them, because actually, a lot of these things aren't seen as being good enough to kind of, pass on to future generations.
Right.
But then I just was really interested in just seeing how many different ways can we make a rag rug. So Rag Rug Techniques for Beginners, my second book that's coming out this week, is actually some of these new techniques that I discovered in different places across the world. And I was kind of trying to understand, how do these people make rag rugs? Because it's such a universal thing. So it covers 8 different techniques. So it's still got the traditional 2 British techniques, because those are very much at the heart of what I know and what I do and what I love. But then I've incorporated 6 other beginner techniques from different countries. And there are projects that you can do so that you can kind of learn how to do them with bigger and smaller projects. Yeah, it was just a fun learning experience, finding out, how do they make a rag rug in Brazil?
So how did you learn about these different techniques, and how did you research them?
I started thinking about this book when I was actually traveling. Feels like a long time ago. But I came across kind of like people making rag rugs in Tanzania. I came across them in Sri Lanka. I came across them in Scandinavia. And you'd just kind of stumble into a corner of the world and you'd be like, oh, a rag rug. And I'd always kind of pick it up and have a little look and see how it was made. I just did a lot of research online. I was hoping to make this book some kind of big travel, me being able to go to these places and, do a bit of making with some locals. But unfortunately, COVID did put a bit of a dampener on that one. Yeah. But I researched, I looked up lots of things online, spoke to people in various countries, and
wonderful.
This is where I've ended up.
So the techniques in your book all look pretty doable for beginners, which of course is the point in the title. However, some techniques require more equipment than others. So what is the absolute most basic point of entry for a beginner and or someone who's on a tight budget who wants to have a go at making a rag rug?
I would say there's one technique in there which is called locker hooking. And that basically requires one very basic hook, which is very cheap. It's probably, a couple of pounds, and rug canvas, which is also pretty darn cheap and quite widely available. That one's a really nice, accessible one. Then the traditional British techniques, which I was mentioning, which is the shaggy technique of rag rugging and the loopy technique, they both, once again, require basically one tool and then a kind of Hessian base. So, old sacking, really.
I was thinking, can you use those kind of old like coffee bean sacks that are quite easy to get hold of for a way to reuse existing textiles?
Yeah, you can do. And in fact, I've seen it sometimes where people have followed the actual pattern that is on the coffee sack.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, which looks really amazing.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, you can use those old potato sacks. Some of them are a little bit dusty, which isn't so nice to work on. But yeah, the ethos of rag rigging is all about recycling. So if you spot one at the local market, why not? Go for it.
Yeah. So as we were saying before, like most of the people that listen to this podcast are into sewing, mainly garment sewing. So how can we put the techniques in your book to good use to help us deal with all the waste that comes with a garment making obsession?
My latest book, Rag Rug Techniques for Beginners, has all of these different techniques, and some of them require longer strips of fabric, but a lot of them require tiny little pieces. Like I think there's one project in there, which is these mini Christmas wreaths for hanging on the Christmas tree. And they require pieces that are like, I think about 1.5 centimeters long by about half a centimeter wide. Like they're tiny little pieces. So even if you've kept these little patches that, they're not really good to use to make something bigger, you can keep these scraps and you can still make good use of them. So I would say it's great for just using up all these little bits and bobs that you've got hanging around.
So what's the best type of fabric to use for making rag rugs?
So it really does depend on the technique, because some techniques require certain fabrics, but it is quite forgiving. The general rule of thumb is the thinner a fabric is, the softer it is, and the less textured it is, the better it is to work with. So I'm talking things like jersey, cotton, swimming costume material, fleece, anything that when you go to squidge it into a ball, it's really pliable and it squidges up nicely. Harder fabrics tend to be ones that are thick and stiff, so really good quality upholstery materials. So, like curtaining or sofa fabrics or anything like that. But, where there's a will, there's a way. And even though I say those fabrics are a bit harder for some techniques, there are others where you're like, go for it. It's fine.
Of course. So how would you recommend that we prepare fabric scraps or old garments to use in these techniques?
So I would probably say you don't need to bother ironing, which will probably be a relief to some
Yay!
ladies. Yeah, because actually in a lot of the techniques, sometimes having it a little bit crinkly adds texture to things, which makes it look more interesting. I would probably just kind of keep similar sized scraps together. So if you've got smaller scraps, put them together because maybe they'd be useful for some of the techniques, maybe the shaggy technique, or maybe there were ones done on a 2-string loom, which requires small pieces. And then if you've got kind of like longer pieces, they may be more versatile for more techniques, because for a lot of rag techniques, we cut our fabric into long strips. Often the longer the strip is, sometimes the better. To be honest, not much prep to be done unless you know specifically what you want to do. There's no point in cutting the bits up yet, but you will probably need to do a little bit of cutting.
So how do you source the fabric you use for your rag creations? Are your friends and family kind of like primed that when they've finished with a garment, they've got to pass it on?
Yeah, you'd be surprised how much fabric comes your way when people know you make a rag rug. Yeah, I'm often the dumping zone for friends and family where they're like, oh, I was going to take this to the charity shop, but then it didn't have these buttons. Do you want it? And I'm like, yep, I'll have it. But if I'm doing a project that has a particular color scheme, maybe, then I will hit the charity shop. And generally in rag rigging, you're looking for the largest garments you can find with preferably the least number of seams.
Right. So maxi dresses, things like that.
Zoe, you're on it. I wasn't even like expecting you to say maxi dresses, but they're always what I go for. And sometimes you'll have both an outer and a lining fabric, and then you get 2 fabrics for basically the price of 1.
Oh, good point.
Tricks of the trade.
I was wondering if there was some way that you could access the garments that are donated to charity, but they don't have any resale value. You know, for example, there's a stain or a rip, something that you could, for your projects, easily avoid, but they wouldn't be able to then sell it as an existing garment. I wonder if there's some sort of hookup. Yeah, excuse the pun.
You can definitely do that. Oh, good pun. You can definitely do that. So actually, I work with a local charity shop and they sell their rag to me.
Oh, brilliant.
And it's basically, they know what I like. They know what I don't like, meaning I don't want loads of men's suit trousers, not because, you can't use them, but there's only so many charcoal grey trousers that one can use. And they'll bung it all in a bag for me. And I pay more than they would get from the rag man because they really do get a pittance. And also there's some kind of technicality where I think they can put it through the tills. It works out better for the local chain as opposed to being classified as rag, which I think gets something else.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to know. So if somebody was interested and they don't, for whatever reason, they've had a big clear out or something, have that much on hand, maybe talking to their local charity shops might be worthwhile.
Yeah, I would basically avoid some of the really big chains of charity shops because they don't have necessarily the authority to make a one-off decision of being like, oh, okay, I'm going to save some blue fabrics for this lady. But if you go to some of the smaller ones or some of the ones which the local branch managers have a bit more authority, then you can definitely make a deal.
So how hard wearing are rugs made from fabric scraps and old clothing?
So they really are very hard wearing. It's the kind of thing where obviously you've got to take care of it. Particularly the British techniques of rag rigging that are done on the Hessian base. Hessian, if you get it wet and then it doesn't fully dry and then it gets wet again, it'll rot it from the inside.
Right.
So there are a couple of things which I guess you could say are the Achilles heel of rag rugs, but very few. If anyone's worked with Hessian before, they'll know that it's a very strong fiber and it, short of cutting it, it really is very hard wearing. So what I kind of tend to recommend is if you're doing the kind of traditional British techniques, you don't tend to back your rag rugs because it traps the dust between the backing and the rag rugging. And if you then get dust inside of the rug, it can, for example, wear it out from the inside outwards. If you leave them open, it means that the kind of dust and everything can travel through it. So you can either give it a really good shake outside, or actually very occasionally I do put them in the washing machine. So I'll pop them in a pillowcase. I vacuum them as well. People often, when they the texture of the rag rugs, they think to themselves, oh my gosh, is it going to like suck all of the pieces out? I promise you it doesn't. With the different techniques that I've covered in the new book, some of them are more hard wearing than other ones. So some of them, for example, are a bit more pet proof. You know, it's all about the texture, really.
What would be the best one that you would recommend for like by a doorway?
Pretty much any of them would be fine by the front door. It's more to do with moisture that rag rugs tend to have problems. But if you were doing one that was going to get like dirty boots on it and stuff like that, I would probably go for the twined rugs are quite nice. And it's a form of very basic weaving, but you don't need a very complicated loom to do it. But basically twining gives you a really kind of like tight knit, quite hard wearing weave, which would be really nice for by a front door.
What was your favourite project that you made for this book?
Oh, that's a really good question. I did really enjoy the end effect of this 5-foot Christmas tree, because it had always been one of my, bucket list projects that I'd wanted to make for a very long time. Yeah. And seeing how well it turned out, I was really kind of blown away by that one. One of the techniques in the book was peg loom weaving, and it was something that I'd seen before, but I'd never tried. And I was really, really excited at the possibilities, because you could build a runner rug in like a day and a half. It was just so quick to make a large rug. And I'm not going to kind of sugarcoat things. Rag rigging is not generally a quick craft. It's very kind of mindful. You'd build your rug up over a couple of months. But the fact that with the peg loom weaving, I was building a massive rug in a day and a half, I was just like, wow, I could get used to this. Yeah, and I think with rag rigging as well, you don't have to do a massively complicated design. Like if you're someone who's really creative, you can recreate Van Gogh's sunflowers in rag rigging if you wish to do so.
Yeah.
However, because of the texture of rag rigging, if you just want to do a really beautiful, simple striped rag rug using fabrics that maybe have memories or, it will look lovely. You cannot go wrong really in rag rigging.
Yeah. I like the idea as well of it being very accessible for people. Like you were saying, it's something that can be done seated. So if people have some sort of physical kind of limitation, or there's times where they have to spend time in bed, that's something that they can still access and still be involved in.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some videos on YouTube just kind of teaching some of the basic techniques. And I had a lady from America contact me, and she's actually blind. And she said she was teaching herself how to rag rug from my videos. She said that she was having a really nice time. And yeah, because it's so imperfect. And actually, it's the imperfection which makes things perfect in rag rugging, because it's all about texture.
Oh, lovely. So what kind of people, I'm really interested in this, what kind of demographic do you get of the people that attend your face-to-face classes?
Gosh, a real mix, to be honest. Because rag rigging has become a bit more popular, you are kind of seeing some of the kind of younger people who maybe they haven't done much craft, but over lockdown, maybe they've started to get into it. Then you've got your kind of proper, I don't know, they've got sewing machine, overlocker, every kind of fabric under the sun in their stash. They've maybe got a lovely sewing room, the proper hardcore craft people.
Yeah, who are just looking to add another string to their bow.
Exactly. Often they're looking to use up those stashes that they've been hoarding at home. Yeah, you'd be surprised. I do get some men along as well. Rag rigging used to be actually quite a gender neutral-ish craft, like everything's relative, but rug making did used to have a bit more balance than some of the other classes did. And in fact, I think it was like after the war, rug making was used in some quite cutting edge institutions across the UK as a form of treating PTSD.
Amazing.
there were some quite cutting edge places where they were teaching people how to do various crafts as a form of...
in like a therapeutic session.
Yeah, exactly.
So could you give us any ideas or tips on how to maintain your fabric stash for rag rugging or any other kind of textile based craft?
So my studio is just a riot of colour. It's I also, I have a massive collection of something which I call blanket yarn, and it's where I work with the mills in Yorkshire. And when they make blankets and scarves, they'll cut this selvage edge off, which is basically a strip of blanket, but one long continuous strip of blanket, like you would get yarn. And I buy it off them in like a 200 kilo bale. It basically saves that from going to waste. And I ball it all up into 250 gram balls, and it's really lovely to rag rug with because it's all 100% wool. It's really kind of nice that it's already cut into strips, and you're recycling, so you're using up something that would otherwise go to waste.
Are they all different colours?
Yeah, different colours. Some of them are kind of tartans. Some of them, it just depends on what the scarves are that they've made or what the blankets are. And some clever people from various places, they've, knitted with it or crocheted with it or, woven with it. But I tend to do the rag rug techniques with it. But in terms of storing things, I would say that if you're going to be designing things, it's useful to have things stored in terms of colour. So I generally always classify kind of like reds and oranges together. I weirdly put yellows and greens together. I'll put blues as a separate category because I've got so much of it. Then I've got pinks and purples, what I call neutrals, which is all your kind of Scandi chic, blacks, greys, creams. And then I've got my miscellaneous one, which is the ones which don't have one dominant colour in them. They're like everything, because actually within each of the colour categories, if a fabric is predominantly blue but has a bit of pink in, I'll always put it with the blues, for example.
Yeah.
Because it'll pair well with those kind of block colours.
Oh, that sounds beautiful.
Yeah, and I keep them in clear tubs because, to be honest, it just makes it easier for me to just visually see what I've got on hand.
So can you tell me about the kits that you sell?
Yeah, so my rag rug kits are designed for a complete beginner who's never rag rugged a day in their life to be able to get the kit and be able to start rag rugging straight away if they want to. I don't provide any fabric in the kit because I don't want to be going to China and buying, things of felt and pre-manufactured fabric for people to put into a rug, because that's very much not the ethos of rag rugging.
Sure.
It's basically just, your one-stop shop for if you want to make a rag rug, you've got everything you need except the fabric. And I also say in there what I recommend, and I've got design tips and a 28-page booklet in terms of how you're doing things. And
oh, that sounds fantastic. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for talking to me, Elspeth. It's been really, really interesting. I definitely want to make a rag rug. I'm very excited. Thank you very much for sharing some of your holiday time with me.
Oh, thanks, Zoe. It's been lovely having a chat with you.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!